Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting live from the fabulously fluoridated capital of Auckland, New Zealand, the island change procrastination in the sunny slave South Pacific. It's not only fluoridated, well, except for Hamilton. Hamilton, the second largest city in the country, just got fluoride kicked out of the water supply, so that's a good one. But anyway, my very special guests have just both joined us now. We have the illustrious Alfred Lambremont Webre from exopolitics.com and andrew-d-basiago, the awesome chrononaut. Guys, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny.
All right. Now, Andrew, you're calling in specifically because of a guest that I had on yesterday, Mr. Eugene Irvin, and you had a few things to quickly put out about him. You said you know who he really is or something?
Well, I know a Eugene Sonny Irvin III. He's been stalking me for a year. He's mentally ill. He first called me in May of 2012 at 11:30 p.m. on a Friday. Knowing that I'm in the solo practice of law, so somebody in legal practice for themselves, without even a secretary or a paralegal working with me, is usually pretty tired around 11:30 at night on a Friday. And over the last year, or 13 months or so, he has placed numerous late-night telephone calls and has sent me hundreds of unsolicited emails containing both threats and taunts, earning him the 7th place on my cell phone registry reserved for kook number 7. After I began appearing on Coast to Coast AM in 2009, 2010, and 2011, informing the people about the U.S. government's time-space capability and very sensitive political issues like the fact that the last 6 or 7 United States presidents have had prior knowledge of their presidencies as a result of the U.S. time-space capability. I believe the U.S. federal government has put these stalkers in my life. One of them, Kevin Perfield, was arrested about 6 weeks ago by the Portland police for contacting the surviving family members of the Aurora, Colorado shooting victims and telling them that their loved ones were still alive. So one is actually under an indictment. Well, actually, we know that he's, at least it was suggested that he was under indictment in New Jersey for making 20 unsolicited telephone calls to Lisa Beamer, the surviving widow of Todd Beamer of Flight 93 fame. Now, Eugene Irvin was born in 1977, so his claim that he was involved in Project Pegasus as a child can't be true. Project Pegasus was no longer in operation in 1970 or after 1977. He also claims that several years ago at an Army base in Spokane, Washington, he saw me appear as a 17-year-old, having time traveled there, presumably in 1978 when I was 17. I'm now 51. And that can't be possible because I wasn't doing anything for the federal government during my high school years. I simply was doing nothing. My federal experience in the area of defense technical activities of the United States involved 4 years of service from 1968 to 72 in Project Pegasus, which was DARPA's time travel program, and then 4 years of service for the CIA's Mars Jump Room program between 1980 and 84 when I was at UCLA as an undergraduate. My junior high and high school years were devoid of any contact with the federal government. So his subjective claim that he saw me as a 17-year-old, again, is simply not possible. So this man is deranged. And let me just tell you some of the provocative things that he's done, because I know that he just appeared as a guest on your program. He has called me on the telephone, begun a normal conversation with me, provoked me into emotionally venting about my project experiences, surreptitiously taped those conversations, and then placed them on YouTube, which is an invasion of privacy and false light publicity. He has also placed 2 telephone calls to me in the last year where he's at least reported to me that he's approaching the sentry posts at U.S. Army bases in classified facilities where there are armed guards, unannounced and unwelcomed without any legitimate identification while talking to me on his cell phone. And my concern there that he was attempting to suicide or get arrested, by being shot or arrested for breaching the perimeter of a classified or sensitive military or other installation in the United States. One was placed in Spokane, he said, at an Army base, and the other was placed from a secured facility in Colorado. So this individual has been provoking military arrest or being shot by military guards while speaking to me on the telephone. Now, who do we think he is, or do we have any information about who he might be? He claims that he's the son of Eugene Irvin II, who has been identified as George H.W. Bush's campaign manager when Bush Sr. ran for the U.S. Senate in 1964. I've obtained a photograph of that man standing next to a very young George H.W. Bush, who was only, 40 years old in 1964. And Eugene Irvin was younger, he was in his 30s. And the man standing next to a very young George H.W. Bush in that campaign photograph, standing in front of an American flag with the Bush name behind them, bears a striking resemblance to the Eugene Sonny Irvin III that I downloaded from his Facebook personal page when he began stalking me, just to protect myself by knowing who he was. So it looks like I'm being stalked by a mind-controlled asset of the Bush apparatus. And let me just finish out by saying that this stalking began when I began doing radio programs with individuals like my good friend Alfred Webre, and also yourself and Roxy Lopez and Michael Vera, all of whom he's contacted, by the way, in this campaign of harassing me. And I stated during those interviews, you may recall, information that had never been released before, which is that both George H.W. Bush and his son George H.W. Bush and his son George W. Bush both had prior knowledge of their presidencies from around the year 1971, resulting from Project Pegasus obtaining prior knowledge of future events by 1971. So this person is I regard as a dangerous individual, and I disavow anything he has said in the mass media about me or about Project Pegasus. I can provide, even though I've deleted a lot of his voice messages to me, his voicemails, I have not deleted any of his emails, and I can provide hundreds of his harassing emails. It got to the point long ago where I just started archiving them and not even reading them. For some reason, he believes that I'm responsible for saving America's children from mind control on their campuses just because I served in a defense technical project as a child over 40 years ago. So he's deranged, he's unethical. Recently, I appeared on Michael Vera's show to try to forge some kind of common cause with him so I could understand what was going on with him mentally and get him to stop harassing me. And by the next day, he was sending me harassing emails. So I just want to emphasize to your listening audience that after I began revealing the secret history of the U.S. time-space program and how it affected very sensitive issues like the protocols by which the American people select their president, the federal government put 7 individuals on me with serious enough criminal activity directed towards me to harass me like this individual has, and one of them is already in prison for harassing others. So that's why I wanted to come on today and just disavow any connection to Eugene Irvin beyond being a victim of his criminal harassing behavior.
Okay. Well, so yesterday we had him on for 2 hours and all of that kind of stuff. So he's had his say, and now you've had yours to retort. And as far as I know, that's what balanced journalism is. You let 2 people who have opposing viewpoints have their say, and then you make up your mind based on that, innit?
I concur, Vinny. I'm not in any way disavowing the First Amendment or your fine practice of journalism. I'm just saying that I haven't even listened to the show yet and I won't, because this person is a villain in my life, just as Kevin Perfield was. People don't know how disruptive this kind of harassment can be. I'm responsible to my girlfriend, my siblings, my other family members, and a growing legal clientele. I use the friendship factor in my law practice. I care about my clients, and a growing body of now 20,000 Facebook friends and members, and a widening group of like-minded souls in the truth movement. And I simply don't have time not just to answer emails, but to protect myself from these disruptors. And their behavior is intentional, it's criminal, and when you go to the federal and state legal authorities, you get no help. When I went to the FBI regarding Kevin Perfield, somebody who literally moved to the Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington area to physically stalk me, he says it on his own YouTube. I came here to meet with andrew-d-basiago. I only knew him as the kook who was harassing me. Okay, I took that to the FBI, that he had contacted my siblings to borrow money from them because he said that he told them he was my friend, which is federal wire fraud, that he was harassing individuals like me and Dr. Sterling Colgate and Phil Corso Jr. because of the work that we've done or that our fathers have done for the US government, that he has harassed political leaders in the country like Governor Jerry Brown of California and different business and financial community leaders like Warren Buffett and his attorney Charles Munger and their families. And when I said I wanted to meet with an FBI special agent to discuss this person's federal crimes, the FBI special agent out of the Portland, Oregon office directed me to a website on the internet that the FBI maintains to discourage financial fraud on the internet. It had nothing to do with a legitimate legal criminal investigation of somebody who I had revealed what his federal crimes were when I called them. So my point there is that the FBI and the federal and state criminal authorities in the United States are complicit in not protecting public figures from these stalkers. So something as grievous as the terrible wounds that Congresswoman Gabriel Giffords suffered, I am blaming on the US government and its criminal enforcement authorities. This individual, Kevin Perfield, had threatened me. He had contacted my colleagues like Alfred Lambremont Webre and Laura Magdalene Eisenhower.
Can you can corroborate that, can't you, Alfred?
Yeah,
well,
sorry. At some point, I would like to jump in here and provide my own independent testimony about Irvin. And what's very interesting to me, because this is a totally spontaneous convergence of topics, because we had planned, that is, I came on to talk about the transhumanist agenda. And Irvin, in my judgment, and I've stated this publicly, is a walking example of someone who has been implanted with these new human robotization nano implant technologies. So once Andy has had his say, I'd like to make a statement, if I could.
Thanks, Alfred. I'm done. I just wanted to express my umbrage that I actually took the Kevin Perfield stalking, which has gone on since December of 2010, and involved him, contacting my siblings, my colleagues, people who I worked with on Project Pegasus, like Dr. Colgate, and utterly disrupting our lives. There has to be a crime of stalking when it leads to medical injury of the targets. I've developed medical symptoms as a result of these stalkers being in my life. I have chronic indigestion, and I now have neuropathic pain in my feet and legs that I did not have. I was healthy when they began stalking me. But if you have a constellation of 7 individuals in your life that you can't even get the FBI to investigate when they're committing criminal wrongdoing targeting you, it becomes a management problem. I may have $500 or $1,000 or $2,500 in my personal checking account after I pay my bills as a lawyer in solo practice. I don't have the monetary resources to hire a private investigator to shut these people down. This is persecution. And the legal authorities in the United States and the state legislatures, the Congress, need to address it. Stalking has to be made a federal crime. These people use federal instrumentalities to defraud and to stalk, and they need to be shut down and put in prison. Anyway, I just wanted to make my point on that. But Alfred, fire. I don't want.
We've got about 90 seconds before we run to break, Alfred. So make it zippy, and then we'll come back and expand on it.
Yeah. Well, just with regard to this person, Irvin, and I did not hear the program yesterday, but in 90 seconds, Mr. Irvin harassed 3 fellow talk show hosts, myself, actually 4, myself, Roxy Lopez, Michael Vera, and Peter Kling, to the point where all of us had to consult privately and block him because he was putting harassing posts on all of our Facebook pages. He was sending us harassing emails. He was calling into our shows, and we finally had to block him. And so I can testify as to that. And in the course of that, based on the knowledge that I acquired and expertise that I've acquired over the last 40 years of studying this field, which I'd like to speak about after the break, I classified him as a human robot, in essence.
All right. Well, we now have the AFR robot putting on the advertisements. So we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, in just a few minutes at the VinnyEastwoodShow.com. Alfred, Lambremont, Webre from exopolitics.com and andrew-d-basiago from project-pegasus is my guests, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness and replicants, if you lose your sense of humour, you'll go freaking nuts. That's a Blade Runner reference, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, in case you haven't seen the movie. All right. And by the way, I've got, for those of you who watch the webcam on YouTube, I've got some pictures of Mars here, which are quite interesting. Like, they modify the colours, so like on the left here you'll see Mars with a blue sky and white snow on the ground, and to the right it just seems like dead redness. And what NASA's been doing is they've been taking pictures on Mars, like there's a top picture here where you got a nice little red kind of sandy mountain with a blue sky, and down below is the images that NASA released afterwards, which are modified so that the sky looks kind of grey and dark, and there's no blue to it. So what's happening on that planet, I wonder? And why exactly are they covering up just the colours of it? It's like, well, we can't allow people to realise that puppy's got a blue sky. That might not be good. People might think that we're BSing about it, and then there might be previous civilizations and so forth on there. I don't know. Maybe I'm just going off on a tangent. Where were we? Alfred, you had something to continue before we went off to break there.
Oh, well, no, I being on the air now with a living Mars experiencer, yeah, we just can't let that question go. And so I would ask my esteemed colleague, who is a Mars experiencer, what his response to that question would be.
Well, I just want to say, by the way, there's a smoking gun right in every library that has a complete collection of National Geographic, because the September 1955 edition of the National Geographic shows the vegetative life forms in the greener part of Mars. And I just got that tip a couple of days ago from one of my members of Mars Anomaly Research Society on Facebook. I haven't even published it yet, but I'm looking for that edition. Somebody's going to send me a scan of it. Essentially, they are attempting to conceal the fact that Mars is a living planet, an inhabited planet, not just because we've been there for over 30 years, but because we're there. There are U.S. installations on Mars. We were going up there via jump room in the late 70s. I was one of those jumpers. And in fact, that is the sensitive nature of the information that I have that would even cause them to put these replicants right out of Blade Runner in my life. And that is this, Vinny, and this is actually breaking news. The number of U.S. citizens that we have now linked to the CIA's Mars jump room program, most of them as jumpers, some of them as support personnel, now numbers 17 named individuals. And those have been developed by myself and my fellow trainees and chrononauts who went to Mars with me on occasion and sometimes were present on the surface on other occasions. And we met up, and that's William B. Stillings and Bernard Mendez. So if we begin with Michael Relf, and Henry Neumann, who was the Henry Deacon informant to Project Camelot, being the first and second whistleblower to come forward. And then I came forward and brought William B. Stillings and Bernard Mendez. The three of us, myself and Brett and Bernie, have now identified 12 other individuals linked to the CIA's Mars jump room program. So at this point, the cat is not only out of the bag on the fact that Mars has been visited for over 30 years, but as was testified to by Laura Eisenhower, about the fact that she was invited to settle on Mars with her two twin boys, Gavin and Garrick, in the 2006-2007 timeframe. We now have testimony coming from those who stayed there. For example, Michael Rell, and having stayed there, not just as a visitor, and Laura Eisenhower having been approached to settle there. So with 17 individuals linked to the Mars jump room program, there's simply no way that this story is ever going to be repressed again and not become part of our common culture. Mars is not only inhabited, but it is at this point a colony of Earth.
Well, it sounds very similar to the film Doom. Have you seen the film Doom with The Rock? No.
No, I haven't even read Frank Herbert's novel Doom. I think
no. I think you misheard me. Doom with an M. Yeah.
Oh, Doom. Oh,
well,
I missed that.
You'll love this, Andy, because guess how they get to Mars? Well, they have a jump room, and it's apparent, and the jump room has apparently been there, buried in the desert for umpteen thousands of years, which the ancient civilization of Mars used to escape to Earth from some crap that they created there. Isn't that interesting?
That may be the origin of the jump rooms. We don't know. We know there was a Hughes aircraft connection. The jump room that we were taking to Mars from El Segundo, California in the early 80s was at 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, which in a building that was then owned and operated by Hughes. And I've been speculating, because one of my law clients was a private secretary to Hughes at the El Segundo, California headquarters for Hughes Aircraft, which was not the same building. And she told me, much to my astonishment, that when she was working for Hughes in the early 70s, he came to her desk and said, "Rose, there are going to be several men visiting your desk this afternoon. They're not from our planet. They look like ordinary human beings, but they're not from here. So just be very polite to them and accept the aerospace parts that they have for me. And then they'll just drop off the parts and leave." Well, this indicates that Howard Hughes, the Titanic industrialist of the 20th century, in several major ways, was in a human ET liaison. Now, I had been speculating that whole story about his condition in the years leading up to his supposed death in 1976 was an obvious CIA cover story, how he had become disheveled, he had grown his hair out several feet, his nails out several inches, and was spending most of his time peeing in a mason jar while eating black walnut ice cream while watching Ice Station Zebra over and over again. And I said, an individual as illustrious as Howard Robert Hughes would not have ended his life that way. Well, now we know from two brilliant researchers by the name of Mark Music, an investigator, and Douglas Wellman, who's an academic in Southern California, who's a book author, that Howard Hughes lived for an additional 25 years after his putative death in 1976. He changed his name to Nick Nicely, which is actually a pun. I mean, when you nick somebody nicely, you basically cage money from them in business with a smile on your face, right? Which was Hughes's approach. Anyway, supposedly he lived as Nick Nicely in Alabama with a woman named Eva McClellan for 25 years and died at age 96 in 2001. Hughes having been born in 1905 in Texas. They have abundant evidence in the book, even the presence of his Mormon support team down the road from him in a small town in Alabama where he was living the rest of his life. They have photographs of him. He actually dyed his hair blonde and received an iris transplant in the only country in the world where you can have your irises recolorized, which happens to be Panama. So my speculation during my truth campaign that part of the missing element here was the fact that Howard Hughes, who was a brilliant engineer, did not die in 1976 and was alive during the whole time that we were actively jumping to Mars from a building immediately south of the Los Angeles International Airport that he then owned and operated.
Incidentally, in the movie Doom, the jump room that they go into is underground just outside of Los Angeles city limits.
Well, there you have them taking true facts and spinning them as fiction, which, if you think about it, is a brilliant form of disinformation, because by fictionalizing fact, you convince the public that fact is fiction. Another Hughes linkage here is Bernard Mendez, our good friend and fellow jumper, was a personal friend with not only Hughes, but Richard Milhous Nixon. We also have the CIA linkage to Hughes. As Mark Music found, during the remainder of his life, Hughes was carrying a CIA telephone that could not be traced. So Howard Hughes was, in fact, a top CIA operative. And the strange thing is that his behavior during the end of his life was as if he was basically moving around quickly so that he wouldn't be assassinated. So I think Howard Hughes may turn out to be a much more positive figure in American history than he has thus far been credited as being. But he lived on a very dangerous and strange footing during that last quarter century of his life. But I believe that Hughes was still alive because, for example, the testimony of Bernard seemed to indicate that both Hughes and Nixon were following the activities of the jump room program, Hughes after he had supposedly died, and Nixon after he had left the White House, the presidency, in disgrace in August of '74. I said, you're talking about Nixon. Nixon left office in '74. How could he have any involvement in the jump room program if it began in the late '70s and was really in its heyday when we were jumping in the early '80s? And he said Nixon was following it. And I said, you mean he was following the jump room activities in retirement in San Clemente? And Bernard said, yes, he was engrossed in it. He even wanted to know about all of the jumpers. He would read like thumbnail sketches of what the government knew about their pasts and their futures. So it just keeps on getting stranger. We've now linked, in all likelihood, the jump room program, not just to Hughes, as we had already done through several data points, but to the Hughes that was the true Howard Hughes who did not die in 1976. That was an imposter who had been used as kind of a decoy that they would move around and, they'd have him move into a hotel in Las Vegas or Los Angeles and say, well, Howard Hughes has just rented the penthouse suite. And Howard Hughes might be in some place like Panama or Alabama or someplace that he would never be found. So anyway, that's the story. That in fact, we were fed information about people like Howard Hughes, written by authors like Michael Drosnin, basically freelance writers on contract, when we were given our cultural understanding of these figures. But who was ever told that Hughes had not just designed the Glomar Explorer to snatch a Soviet submarine off the floor of the Pacific Ocean, but had also worked with the Martian humanoid civilization to place some of our explorers on the Red Planet? And similarly, who read of the sad story of Richard Nixon in retirement after resigning the presidency in disgrace had ever been told that he was so interested in the more advanced activities of the U.S. government that he was actively following the affairs of the Mars jump room program after he left office? But this is the hidden history that's now emerging.
Mm-hmm. Well, lots of hidden history seems to be emerging, particularly in this day and age. And my concern is, though, as well, you know how JFK was assassinated over 50 years ago, and government documents and things like that, they stay classified for a certain period of time. And even now, when, you'd have to be, what's the term, mentally retarded in order to think that it was just a lone gunman that killed him, I think is the technical term. The truth still has not really come out. And I feel really quite apprehensive that the truth will ever come out about any real major or important issue that threatens the status quo and the elite and their plans for humanity. I mean, suppression syndrome just seems to be infinite in a lot of ways.
Well, I would aver in the case of the Kennedy assassination that the truth will be known, and that the ultimate mastermind of the JFK assassination was Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the reason I'm predicting that, Vinny, is that I practice criminal law, and one of the major aspects of criminal law that defines it really is forensic evidence, basically criminalistics. And in the vast literature of the JFK assassination, including 150 or more books, 200 books, there's been very little forensic-based physical evidence. But there is one conspicuous piece of evidence that has never been rebutted, that was entirely admissible as a very good piece of evidence, and that would put anybody in prison. Just like the fact that the glove at O.J. Simpson's estate had not only his blood on it, but the blood of both victims, which is hard to do if you're not responsible for a murder. But in the case of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, one of the only pieces of reliable forensic evidence is the palm print of Malcolm Wallace on one of the boxes in the sniper's nest. Malcolm Wallace was Lyndon Baines Johnson's assassin. In the Billy Solestes case, it was revealed that Johnson had ordered the assassination of 7 individuals by Malcolm Wallace, including his own sister, Josepha Johnson. The Johnson Foundation would not have threatened to sue the History Channel were it not for them reporting that in the final episode of Nigel Turner's classic treatment of the assassination, which was entitled The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And the last episode of that was The Guilty Men. And I would predict that that work of journalism will stand the test of time because that palm print was reliable. It contained about 26 indicators that was the palm print of Malcolm Wallace. Malcolm Wallace had been tried for first-degree murder in a circumstance in which Lyndon Baines Johnson, as a young congressman, had rented a hotel room across from the courthouse where Malcolm Wallace was being tried for for the murder of a farmer by the name of Henry Marshall, who had disrupted Johnson's illicit bribery conspiracy involving federal agricultural allotments in Texas. So I don't, for that reason, I respectfully dissent on the notion that the Kennedy assassination will never be told. It will be told, and I believe that as Philip Nelson found, the mastermind of the Kennedy assassination was President Johnson.
Well, and dovetailing with that, I mean, saying that it's never going to be told, I mean, I don't know that. But the other element is, will the people responsible ever be punished? Is Lyndon B. Johnson still alive?
No, I don't think the participants.
So something tells me he skipped out on any possible court punishment. You know, sorry, can't punish me. I'm dead.
Well, here's another one for you that may show how they actually implemented the conspiracy. I actually found...
We don't have any time. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show, the show that's as credible as an edible extraterrestrial on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. All right. Enough of the fun. Well, in fact, that's kind of what we've been doing most of the time here with this fun. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling very exhausted. You know what I mean when you haven't taken a break for several months and you're working all day, every day. You're talking to this person, that person, and mate, your brain just kind of starts to die eventually. It's like it's asphyxiated from relaxation in a sense of the word, and that's kind of what I'm going through right now. So very, very shortly, whoosh, I'm gonna give myself a break of some description. It's gonna be blissful, you know. Sit at home and oh wait. You know what? It'd be good to have a holiday. Would anybody out there donate me some gas money out there? Go to the VinnieEastwoodShow.com, click on the donate button, and a keyword Vinnie Eastwood's petrol to go somewhere to relax. That'd be nice. Okay. Now we were talking about quite a range of subjects already, guys. Going from replicants stalking Andy, to Mars anomalies, to nanotechnology, and now the JFK assassination. You know, who can really cram that into an interview of this size? I don't know. Well, anyway, I seem to be having a little bit of problems with my stuff here, so I'm not sure if you guys can even hear me. But if you do, please continue to take it away. Alfred, we haven't heard from you much this interview.
Well, you know, I think that my piece really was about the transhumanist agenda, and to bring it back to where we started, it was just doing two things: providing firsthand testimony to back up what Andy stated about one Mr. Irvin. Let me get his full name here: Eugene Sonny Irvin III. As number one, having stalked four of us talk show hosts, namely Roxy Lopez, Michael Vera, Peter Kling, and myself, and demonstrating, by putting all of these posts on our Facebooks, messages sent to us, emails sent to us that characteristically contained circular, nonsensical arguments and texts that he was a victim of MK Ultra, but I think beyond that he was really a target of these nano implant technologies that are part of a program that a number of European experts that I interviewed over the last couple of weeks characterize a, quote, a global enslavement program. And these nanotechnologies have now shifted from electromagnetic waves, which were favored back in the 1970s, so that, the remedies of tinfoil hats and lead helmets are not going to be successful at blocking these. Now they've graduated to scalar waves, and what has been set up are super quantum computers, a grid of super quantum computers in the quantum cloud that are used to control what they call pipes. Like your brains, your entrained brains are called pipes now. And these are a reference to the brains of humans that have been taken over via implants that you can breathe in through via chemtrails, and that can breach the blood-brain barrier. And the implanting of brains can also take place via frequencies derived from an individual's DNA, which is harvested from blood samples. All infants they have blood samples taken from them at birth precisely for that reason, so that they can be robotized from birth. And any medical lab tests that you have, well, your DNA goes on file. And this organization is now doing free public tests for RF radio frequencies. And at a recent one in London, just members of the public, 40% of the members of the public tested came up positive for RF frequencies, meaning that they had been chipped and were now being controlled via scalar waves. At a recent reading, 100% of the public that came up to be scanned for RF frequencies were emitting RF frequencies, meaning that they had been chipped, either from the chemtrails or from DNA samples or other means. And they found one 5-year-old child that was emitting RF frequencies, meaning that children are at risk. Now, to talk a bit about the supergrid, over 1,000 grids, including the grid that we use for our electricity, have been connected into a mind control, into a mind control supergrid that is connected to HARP as a master planetary mind control machine, that coordinates these scalar technologies, super quantum computers, a quantum cloud, the supergrid of over 1,000 grids, and is coordinating a growing population of human robots or robotized humans. There was an estimate now about 3 years ago that already 6 million persons in the European Union, that's a very conservative estimate, were prototyped robots. I mean, one used to think that the transhuman agenda was that they would manufacture these robots and they would become super intelligent and the robots would take over. No, it's not that. It's that humans would be increasingly robotized and the human race would be taken over as robots and controlled by the controllers, who are the financial and monarchical bloodlines and other controllers who would not be so taken over in coordination with dimensional manipulatory ETs. So that is what the situation is, and it's fairly serious because Andy can testify now, and he's done it with dates and names, that at least two of these robotized humans, one of whom is directly connected to the campaign of George H.W. Bush, who, as CIA director, was instrumental in implementing a lot of these technologies as CIA director and during his presidency. So it all wraps up in a neat little bow if you look at it from an historical kind of time sequence. And this, in my judgment, is possibly one of the most challenging agendas that faces the human race among its many, many challenges. There are so many challenges vying for our attention now that they're like overwhelming. But this is an amazing challenge. One of the, they're beginning to find some things to be able to counteract it. For example, homeopathic gold, they found, can counteract these new scalar technologies. So you can get that at any health food store. But this agenda has already taken over all of the institutions worldwide, the governments, the legislatures, the courts, the police departments at the cybernetic level, at the control level, are all being led increasingly by robotized humans. So this is a grave concern. I've been working, I had an initial meeting 2 days ago with the group in Brussels, and we're now working to have an international congress there that would have experts in the technology, experts from the people who are being targeted so they can talk about it from the medical perspective and from the juridical and legal perspective and from the communications. How can we begin to awaken the planet? Because this is going forward in an atmosphere of complacency and secrecy. You know, humans, and very few of the robotized humans know that, in fact, this has occurred to them. So this is quite the challenge. So I really want to commend Andy at coming forward so forcefully and with so much data to make this public.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Andy, for your work. Thank you, Alfred, for joining us today as well. I was just thinking about what would you call a robotized human? Could you call them robotussins? I'll take that as a yes. Okay. We'll see you again sometime, guys. Alfred Webre, ladies and gentlemen, exopolitics.com, and andrew-d-basiago. You can check him out, the Mars Anomaly research. You can search that on Facebook. It should come up with his group. And if you have some free time now, I'm going to do an after-the-show chat. So listeners, if you want to join us on the chat room, I'm on Skype. Vincent.Eastwood is my Skype name, and we'll be starting that conversation right after the show in just a few seconds. So Thank you very much. We'll see you again sometime, ladies and gentlemen.
At 11:30 p.m. on a Friday, knowing that I'm in solo practice of law, so somebody in legal practice for themselves, without even a secretary or a paralegal working with me, is usually pretty tired around 11:30 at night on a Friday. And over the last year, or 13 months or so, he has placed numerous late-night telephone calls and has sent me hundreds of unsolicited emails containing both threats and taunts, earning him the 7th place on my cell phone registry reserved for kook number 7. After I began appearing on Coast to Coast AM in 2009, 2010, and 2011, informing the people about the U.S. government's time-space capability and very sensitive political issues like the fact that the last 6 or 7 United States presidents have had prior knowledge of their presidencies as a result of the U.S. time-space capability. I believe the U.S. federal government has put these stalkers in my life. One of them, Kevin Perfield, was arrested about 6 weeks ago by the Portland police for contacting the surviving family members. One was placed in Spokane, he said, at an Army base, and the other was placed from a secured facility in Colorado. So this individual has been provoking military arrest or being shot by military guards while speaking to me on the telephone. Now, who do we think he is, or do we have any information about who he might be? He claims that he's the son of Eugene Irvin II, who has been identified as George H.W. Bush's campaign manager when Bush Sr. ran for the U.S. Senate in 1964. I've obtained a photograph of that man standing next to a very young George H.W. Bush, who was only, 40 years old in 1964. And Eugene Irvin was younger, he was in his 30s. And the man standing next to a very young George H.W. Bush in that campaign photograph, standing in front of an American flag with the Bush name behind them, bears a striking resemblance to the Eugene Sonny Irvin III that I downloaded from his Facebook personal page when he began stalking me, just to protect myself by knowing who he was. So it looks like I'm being stalked by a mind-controlled asset of the Bush apparatus. And let me just finish out by saying that this stalking began when I began doing radio programs.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting live from the fabulously fluoridated capital of Auckland, New Zealand, the island change procrastination in the sunny slave South Pacific. It's not only fluoridated, well, except for Hamilton. Hamilton, the second largest city in the country, just got fluoride kicked out of the water supply, so that's a good one. But anyway, my very special guests have just both joined us now. We have the illustrious Alfred Lambremont Webre from exopolitics.com and andrew-d-basiago, the awesome chrononaut. Guys, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny.
All right. Now, Andrew, you're calling in specifically because of a guest that I had on yesterday, a Mr. Eugene Irvin, and you had a few things to quickly put out about him. You said you know who he really is or something?
Well, I know a Eugene Sonny Irvin III. He's been stalking me for a year. He's mentally ill. He first called me in May of 2012, between 1980 and 84, when I was at UCLA as an undergraduate. My junior high and high school years were devoid of any contact with the federal government. So his subjective claim that he saw me as a 17-year-old, again, is simply not possible. So this man is deranged. And let me just tell you some of the provocative things that he's done, because I know that he apparently just appeared as a guest on your program. He has called me on the telephone, begun a normal conversation with me, provoked me into emotionally venting about my project experiences, surreptitiously taped those conversations, and then placed them on YouTube, which is an invasion of privacy and false light publicity. He has also placed 2 telephone calls to me in the last year where he's at least reported to me that he's approaching the sentry posts at U.S. Army bases in classified facilities where there are armed guards, unannounced and unwelcomed without any legitimate identification, while talking to me on his cell phone. And my concern there that he was attempting to suicide or get arrested, by being shot or arrested for breaching the perimeter of a classified or sensitive military or other installation in the United States, one of the Aurora, Colorado shooting victims, and telling them that their loved ones were still alive. So one is actually under an indictment. Well, actually, we know that he's, at least it was suggested that he was under indictment in New Jersey for making 20 unsolicited telephone calls to Lisa Beamer, the surviving widow of Todd Beamer of Flight 93 fame. Now, Eugene Irvin was born in 1977, so his claim that he was involved in Project Pegasus as a child can't be true. Project Pegasus was no longer in operation in after 1977. He also claims that several years ago at an Army base in Spokane, Washington, he saw me appear as a 17-year-old, having time traveled there, presumably in 1978 when I was 17. I'm now 51. And that can't be possible because I wasn't doing anything for the federal government during my high school years. I simply was doing nothing. My federal experience in the area of defense technical activities of the United States involved 4 years of service from 1968 to 72 in Project Pegasus, which was DARPA's time travel program, and then 4 years of service for the CIA's Mars Jump Room program.